Hello, well, it's bang on 1 o'clock, so we're going to get started. Welcome to all of you that are joining live. Welcome to this webinar, How to Set Up a Charity. And this is our final webinar for the year, and it will be hosted by our very own Des Stewart, co-founder of Good to Give, and I'm going to hand you right over to him.
Hey.
Hi, Des.
Hi, thank you, Kat. Can you hear me well? Everybody can hear me today?
Yes.
Okay, because that seems to be a common feature when I come on. That probably guy with the one of the deepest voices tends not to be heard. So thankfully I've managed to sort that out. Anyway, yeah, really always a pleasure, as I say, Kat, to join you on these webinars and to share our experience today. Well, we've had, I don't know how many webinars have we had throughout this year so far?
We have had probably close to 20 webinars. It's been a lot.
Easily. I mean, at one point,
Yeah.
I think we started, did we start sort of first week of April, didn't we? So immediately as the lockdown
Yes.
happened.
Yeah, and I think we had one in February as well. So even prior to lockdown, we had one.
Yeah, sure. So we've been able to share a lot of information. The feedback has been absolutely outstanding, and I think that's also encouraged us to keep sharing the knowledge that we've been able to gather over these last years. But I hopefully everybody's keeping safe and not being too depressed by being in this lockdown situation. And although things look like they want to get slightly worse before they get better, we just hope that you're all just keeping safe, and again, hopefully these webinars and these opportunities for us to be able to share and dissect valuable information for our charities, hopefully that's really giving you guys something to look forward to. And we'll certainly continue in 2021. Anyway, let's crack on with this seminar. So, the idea is how do we actually set up a charity? Well, I think it's good to probably just have a look at Good to Give in the first instance and understand what we've been doing and maybe what makes us a bit of an authority in these particular areas. We've been working within the charity sector, non-for-profit sector now for, well, I'd say 11 years. In fact, we actually incorporated in 2010, but we did actually start working within the sector within 2009. And so I guess officially we've done a full 10 years of Good to Give, and yeah, it's been absolutely fantastic working with ministries, hundreds of ministries around the country, as well as secular charities as well, who have have been able to benefit from the knowledge that we have. In our early days, we started as in terms of gift aid and helping those charities to maximize their gift aid capability, and that's put again over the last 10 years, hundreds of thousands of pounds in our clients' pockets in order for them to be able to really work well on the activities that they have been. So again, it's been absolutely great. As for a little bit about me, as Kat gave the introduction, I'm one of the co-founders of Good to Give, and lots and lots of years of experience really across both private and public sectors. And as I'd mentioned earlier, within the last 10 years or so, pretty much given ourselves wholeheartedly to the public sector. And it's fantastic actually for me personally, especially working within the faith arena, because it touches on my background as a young lad growing up in the church, as it were. And certainly seeing the challenges that our churches and other faith groups had. And I think that experience mixed with the corporate experience growing up within the sort of financial compliance sector and technological sector, mixing all of those together really I think has given a great grounding for where we are now and the things that we do. There are actually 5 key services that Good to Give do provide. And we're obviously going to look at setting up charities and charity compliance. And I'm sure there'll be a number of conversations that we can have in this meeting here and beyond. We look after gift aid, so helping our clients to maximize their gift aid capabilities. We look at financial control, so we look after accounting for, again, lots and lots of our clients, and just making sure that things are in the right place, T's are crossed and I's are dotted correctly. That leads us quite nicely onto the fundraising. And if you were part of the conversations that we've been having over the last 9-10 months, we've had several great webinars around fundraising and how to get yourself fundraising ready, and part of what we'll touch on today. I'm sure there could well be questions in and around that. And lastly, we handle GDPR, so General Data Protection Regulation, for a number of our charities. So that within those 5 key services, I always like to explain it's a bit of an umbilical cord, really. It links all of those services together, and pretty much Good to Give are able to provide you everything as a one-stop shop. Today we're going to be looking at a few important things that you absolutely need to know when it comes to charity setup. So when a charity should be registered, the steps of registration, and I'm sure there'll be some questions in there at the end. We'll certainly have some questions, but there were some of our attendees, or people who I believe are still yet to jump on the webinar, who actually put some questions before earlier. So partway through this webinar, we'll take a look at those as well. We're going to look at the different types of non-for-profit legal forms that actually exist, and we'll try and explore the pros and cons between each of those from a legal perspective. One thing that's really, really important to look at is understanding public benefit when you go towards registering a charity, whichever regulator you use, depending on where you are, whether it's in England and Wales, or it's in Ireland, or it's in another one of the home counties. Understanding public benefit and what that means is pretty key. So we'll take a little look at that, and also as we started with, when a charity should actually be registered. So, what are the benefits of actually becoming a charity? Well, I get sort of many people who may say to me, we want to actually start a non-for-profit, but I don't know if we really want to go down the charities road. Some key questions that you've really got to ask yourself. But even if you just looked at the key benefits of being a charity, and I'll just point them out very, very quickly. No corporation tax, rate relief if you're using buildings to run your charity from, and you may have, like I say, a space where your charity acts out its activities, you can get between 80 and 100% rate relief. There are also some VAT benefits. Now, VAT benefits, and I'm sure I'll have some questions around that, can be a little bit sketchy at times in terms of people and the knowledge around VAT, and charities and or people who want to register charities tend to have this belief that, because they're a charity, they should not be paying VAT. Well, yes, charities do pay VAT, but there are some circumstances under which you can reduce your VAT or actually pay no VAT, depending. But again, knowledge is power. And lastly, gift aid. From a gift aid point of view, just the fact that you're a charity means that you are able to enter into the gift aid scheme, which is a way of increasing your charity's income. Those 4 key things alone are so beneficial to charities: corporation tax, rate relief, VAT benefits, and gift aid. So again, certainly take a look at that, look at your mode of operation, and see whether or not you're able to benefit from those things. That will allow the money that comes into your organization to go so much further. The other thing is funding. A benefit of being a charity is funding. You imagine if I'm a grant maker, the idea that I would give money to a organization that is a profit-making organization doesn't make sense. It means that the money that I would give to that organization, a part of that could be deemed as profit and go into the pockets of directors and so on. So, funding charities are always, if a grant maker is going to be giving money, they're typically going to give it to a non-for-profit organization. It don't have to be an actual charity, but the kudos, which is the third part that comes with being a registered charities, means that you actually there's a lot more trust out there. Trust in terms of the public and how the public perceive you, and also how grant makers perceive you. The fact that if you are registered under one of the regulators, and if you're in England and Wales, it will be the Charities Commission. The fact that there are statutory and mandatory requirements of you on an annual basis to report on the income that has come in is pretty key. So from that point of view, those are sort of three very, very key benefits to becoming a charity. So what are the basic requirements in order for you to become a charity? So we're looking at when you must become a charity, and this is what I call the rule of thumb, typical rule of thumb. So if your charity, so when you decide to start a charity, the very first thing that you may not necessarily want to actually go and register immediately, but there comes a point where in any year, in a particular year, that your charity would have raised at least £5,000. If your charity raises £5,000 or you are closely in that ballpark, then at that point you need to register a charity. Bear in mind that the money that is coming into your charity is deemed as public funds, and as such you would then have to, this is one of the Charity Commission's requirements. Or if you are setting up what we call an incorporated form. So there are, we'll certainly look at the types of forms that exist. So where you have your unincorporated and you have incorporated. If you are setting up an incorporated form of charity, then again, you must register that charity from the beginning. So if you know that's the road you want to go down, then whether you have £1 or £0 in your charity, you would aim to register a charity. Okay. Again, and we are going to come on to the public benefit side of things and demonstrating public benefit. And public benefit isn't just about how you feel about what you are doing. It's the way the Charities Commission view what you are doing. And often they have a number of legal statutes based on the objects that you will set out, that you're in respect of the charity and the activities that you do, and they will judge you against those statutes. So public benefit is pretty important. We'll look at that. That takes on two elements. Okay, you need to have a minimum of 3 trustees. So for those of you who are unsure, 3 trustees. But in all the time whilst you're working through the idea of charity registration and how the trustees, may benefit or not, you must always consider conflicts of interest, and often you may want to put in place policies that govern conflicts of interest. And I'm sure at some point there may be questions about that. There is quite a bit for us to get through today, so by all means have your questions ready and we can sort of take some of this up at the end. Okay, and lastly, but by no means leastly, you will be a non-for-profit organization. I always find that one a little bit intriguing, not-for-profit. The idea being that you have to have a certain amount of income and what would be deemed profitability in order for you to have the type of money that is required to complete the aims and objectives as set out in for your charity. But the idea is that the money shouldn't be that you are raising lots of money and doing absolutely nothing with it. The idea being is that you are supposed to spend. In fact, there is a sort of rule of thumb out there that there is a percentage of that money that you would need to spend per annum, which actually shows that you are actively engaging in carrying out the activities and the objects of the charity. So we've been taking a look at public benefit, or we've mentioned that a few times, and public benefit, it's extremely important. I mentioned earlier on that your public benefit is taken by the Charities Commission, and what they do is they have a number of legal statutes which they then judge your charity and what in essence you say you are doing. So for an organization to be a charity, each of its purposes must be for public benefit. So the public benefit requirement has two aspects to it, and those aspects are the benefit aspect and the public aspect. So to satisfy the aspect in respect of the objects of the charities that have to be beneficial, there must be a way of identifying and proving by way of evidence, and the evidence has to be evidence-based, that element of the object that is benefit, i.e. this is the benefit that is provided. And that's going to be, that's key. I see so many applications prior to us getting them, that actually going where they don't actually explain the benefit. The benefits need to be tangible. The other part of the aspect is the public aspect, and that must also satisfy the objects of the charity when it comes to the public. So which members of the public or which group of the public you are actually aiming to serve. So it must be very clear. We always ask when we engage clients in respect of their charity and their objects, we always talk about what is it that you actually do, tangibly do, and who are the beneficiaries of what you do. Now, this can be identified by the activities that your organization is carrying out, and those activities have to underpin the very objects that are noted in a document which is called your governing document. So for those of you who already have charities, or for those of you that are partway through investigating the type of charity that you want to be, you'll be looking at various governing documents, and in those governing documents, there's an area in there very close to at the top of, let's say, page 1, which will talk about the objects of the charity. Okay, and those objects of the charity are typically a number of predefined objects that if you search the Charities Commission, you can find, and there are lots and lots of different objects, and each of those objects are the objects that you would attach ideally to the activities that you already do. Now, I say this because I see it lots, where individuals go in and try to create their own objects. There's no point doing that. There's likely to be an object that will suit the activities that you are doing. But again, like I say, in respect of the benefit side of it and the public side of it, as in the benefit, what is the benefit? What is the tangibility? And also in respect of the public, which group of the public does it serve? Do we serve, maybe 12 to 25 young people? Do we serve, maybe the homeless? Or do we, what do you serve? Who do you serve? So it's important to know that, and it's important to map your activities to objects, and those objects will live in your governing document. I'm sure we'll have some questions around that later on. Okay. Last, we take a look at the process of registering one's charity. So once you've actually considered what we've just spoken about in terms of aspects around benefit, aspects around who you're going to actually serve, you're now in a great position to actually go through the process of setting up your charity. Bear in mind, most people, when they're setting up a charity, it actually comes after they've shown probably many months, if not years, of a labor of love. Again, a number of people that I often sit down with, they've just been doing something out of the goodness of their heart, and they have been, whether it's buying lots of equipment and clothing and so on, and packaging it up and giving it to people who may appear to be less fortunate. That act of charity is something that they've just been doing because it's something that they've always felt that was laid upon them. So going through the process that we're talking about now really helps to solidify in your own mind the actual constructs necessary to actually take something that was a labor of love and now make it something that is an actual an actual service that you can offer in a very, very consistent way. And I think that's one of the things that the people like the organizations like the Charities Commission help to actually underpin. It means that you're actually able to now take something you really have enjoyed doing, but actually make it into something that other people who see the vision, who share the vision, can come in and get involved with you. One other thing that one should consider is whether or not this is if me setting up my charity is something that I should really do. You can often look at it as, if you have a certain amount of resources, whether that resource is just energy and strength or ideas, and say, well, rather than me setting up my own charity, which now requires everything that we're going to be talking through today, maybe I can apply my energy and my strength to another organization that has a similar that have a similar sort of idea to what I was going to have. So maybe in some cases, maybe setting up one's own charity isn't actually the way forward. Maybe coming together with other people who already have the same goal in mind might be the idea and might be the way to go. But should that not be the case, then certainly what we spoke about in terms of the benefit aspect and what we spoke about in terms of the public aspect, when you have that clear, then this is what you need to go through. So check up whether or not setting up the charity is right for you. Well, if you want to go down the road of funding, if you want to have the kudos that comes with actually setting up your own charity, if you are going to be involved in maybe having a venue where you're running your charity and so on from, and you want to benefit on the various tax reliefs that exist, then setting up a charity would certainly be for you. Okay, so once you've done all of that, you then need to go through finding a number of trustees. We've spoken about the number of trustees that there should be. We know that that has to be a minimum of 3. And I'll say this here, this is purely down to experience. When you're setting up the charity, you might want to have the minimum amount of trustees rather than having lots and lots of trustees, because you want to be able to move quite quickly. There may be documents and things like that that need to be signed. There will be things like evidence of that person, personal evidence that person needs to bring up to say that, yes, this is the true likeness of that person, and so on. And the more people, the longer it can take. And I've seen some registrations take a long time because people don't always get their act together. So I would say just stick to the minimum in the first instance. Then you go through the process of adding trustees as required. So once you've found your trustees, and the other thing I would certainly say about trustees is you want to have trustees who are going to add tangible value, real value to your charity. And it should be individuals who share the same values, who share the same vision, and have a heart for the same thing that you are doing. Ideally, they would have, you'd have a mix of individuals, so a combination of professional backgrounds, as well as just individuals who really don't mind pulling their sleeves up and getting their hands dirty, because setting up a new charity and starting something that, let's just say, in terms of setup, has been embryonic, takes a lot of time and takes effort and takes commitment. So once you've found those people, it's then about choosing the type of legal structure. We are going to spend some time looking at legal structures, looking at the various types of structures that exist. Now, in order for you to create or determine that legal structure, you will have to, that legal structure will be underpinned by the type of governing document that legal structure requires. Again, we will take a look at that. We've spoken earlier about public benefit and making sure that the benefit requirement is, again, tangible. So the benefit, what activities relate to the benefit, and which groups of people or persons are there to benefit from that. Then you're in a position to start registering your charity. So there are a number of tick boxes that you do need to go through prior to the registration. Okay, so Kat, these were some questions that were given to us ahead of time. So I'm not sure if Tim and Reverend Daly and Edward are on the call, but this webinar will be, if I'm not mistaken, Kat, it will join all of our other webinars on the YouTube channel. So yeah, people can feel free to go down there, and we ask you certainly to go down. There's lots of good information. So the first question was legally, what's the difference between a foundation and a charity? And what I'll say here is, here in the UK, there's typically no distinction in terms of that as a definition. It's more to do with the way in which money is raised. So you tend to find with a foundation, it tends to be either a private individual, maybe a wealthy benefactor, or maybe an organization that wish to set up a foundation for charitable purposes and put money into it, something like maybe the Prince's Trust or the NHS Trust and things like that, where there is significant contributions from individuals who are pretty, dare I say, wealthy. Whereas with a charity, you tend to find that charities are funded more by individuals and the public, and charities will go to foundations, and foundations will sponsor the causes of charities that meet the same objectives as them. In fact, it's probably it's a great point for me to actually say that if you are looking for fundraising, it's really important to do your investigation, do your homework into the various foundations that are out there. And there are some now, I think, close to or just over sort of 10,000 foundations around the UK who are sort of, I utilize the term, happy to sponsor charities in their endeavors to complete, the aims and objectives that they'd set out. And the reason I say they're happy to do this is because they know that they themselves don't necessarily have all of the manpower, but like tentacles, they want to sort of reach out into far corners, the places that they can't necessarily reach, and touch the same individuals that their foundations were set up to touch. So certainly do your homework, make sure that you investigate, and if you are aligned in terms of your aims and objectives, which in essence are the public benefit that we speak about, then I believe that there's a lot of good benefit you can gain from that. The second question: how do you merge charities? Okay, so if you go to HMRC's website, it will sort of talk about ways in which to merge. The reality is there is no easy way to merge other than to really just start a new charity. Charities can, however, take over. So if I've got a charity and let's say, Kat, you have a charity, and you think, well, you know what, I no longer really want to run my charity. My charity can look after your assets, so I can merge your assets into my charity, and I can take over the work that your charity's been doing. That's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is, like I said, just set up a completely new charity to merge and take the assets and all the goodwill and everything from from both charities or groups of charities and put them into a new charity. Or there's something else that the Gov UK site talks about in respect of you can have another charity in a state of just managing. So I can manage the assets and manage manage what's happening in the charity that really no longer wish to or have the manpower to be able to carry out its aims and objectives. What there must be is there must be synergy in terms of the charities that are aiming to work together in that way. Okay. And question, whoopsie daisy, sorry, my bad. There we go. And as for question number 3, the question is okay, so my particular concerns relate to charity or not-for-profit limited company. I've been told that the former has more demands. All right, so my understanding of this question is, should it really be a charity that is registered, or should it be a not-for-profit that is registered? However, the charity appears to have more demands on it. Well, the easy answer to that is you need to account for all of the income coming into either of the organizations, whether it's a charity or it's a not-for-profit company. Okay, in both aspects, you need to account for all of the money coming in. The difference between the company and the charity, and so Edward Baker, yeah, whoever you've spoken to is correct about the demands on the charity being more, because whereas with a company, you can look at all of the income and that can just go into one pot based on income and expenditure, where the charity is concerned, and we have to bear this in mind, you are dealing with public money, and with public funds, you need to account for that so that it is very clear what money has come in, what pot it has gone into, and that makes up something, I'm sure, for those of you who already have your charities, or for those of you that maybe sit on as trustees on a charity. When you look at your charity accounts, you will notice there is something called the in the income section, you look at something called either endowment, or you'll have restricted funds. So you have restricted funds, unrestricted funds, endowments, or some sort of permutation of that description. And what it normally suggests is it says, right, we have a number of incomes, and some of those incomes are specifically to be used for what the grant maker had advised we should use it for. So if we have, or let me speak in maybe in terms of maybe a church, charity, or religious organization, where there may be income that relates to missionary work. There may be income that relates to building fund. There may be income that relates to young people, and maybe something else. Each of those 3 or 4 incomes must be separated out, and they all live in their own pot. And by way of living in their own pot, they are then ring fenced only to be spent on what the donors had given it for. Okay. And also when it comes to expenditure, again, you need to be able to show how you've expended that money, how you've spent that money. And if all of that money wasn't spent, then fine, it carries over into the next year. But yes, it's a bit more onerous, and there is more of a requirement, typically because you are dealing with public money. Bear this in mind. The concept around charities is very different to that of a company. With a company, you sell goods or you sell a service. So what you're selling is very tangible. When you're as a charity, the income that you have coming in is, well, we hope to do this thing. This is what our aims and objects have set out. So you're giving us money for nothing in return to yourself. Therefore, it's important that the way that that's recorded. So yes, there is certainly more of an onerous set of demands for a charity, and you've also got to ensure that, you know, these pots, how these pots are put aside and how these pots are also spent has to be ready for AGM. So again, the other onerous thing is, as a public company, or sorry, as an actual charity, you have to ensure that you're in a position to account for all of that at an AGM, which is an annual general meeting. And bear this in mind, your annual general meeting may not just be your members and regular supporters. It could be anybody who just walks in off the street, because anybody is welcome to actually ask questions and dig in. Kat, I think somebody raised their hand, and I don't mind having taking a question at this.
So we have a couple of questions actually. The first one is from Gode Okerson. So he says, the £5,000 threshold that you mentioned, is it based on actual grants received or balance sheet totals, which include assets?
Okay, it's purely based on your income. So if you have assets of more than £5,000, then the likelihood was that you would have had income that would have helped you to achieve those assets, or those assets would have been passed to you by way of some sort of legacy or whatever, in which case, yes, so in fact, a combination of assets and also physical cash, or obviously banked cash, would mean that yes, you should actually be setting up your charity. Yeah. Excellent. For sure.
And we have another one from Denise Kenton, and I know you're going to get to this in a few slides actually, but she's asking, how does a SIC differ? So I know you're going to cover that shortly as well.
Yeah, we'll certainly. So SIC being a CIC, which is also often known as a social enterprise. We'll certainly cover that, and by the time I get to the end of that, if there's certainly any questions, then we'll look at that.
Excellent.
Okay. Is that it?
Yes, that's it for now.
Okay, fantastic. All right. Yeah, thanks for that. And let's move on. So, in fact, we'll now start coming into, so we'll certainly be looking at the various types of legal forms, of which one of the questions related to, i.e. the CIC and others, and we'll explore all of those. So there are several legal forms depending on, you know, the way you want to run your organization, the support that you want to gather either from the public or from supporting businesses and other foundations and so on, will determine what you set up. But each of those legal forms is pretty much underpinned by it being either an unincorporated organization or an incorporated organization. And we'll look at the differences between, you know, unincorporated and incorporated. Okay, so let's take the very first of, we're gonna look for a series of incorporated organizations first, and let's take a look at each of those individually, and yeah, let's take it from there. So the first of the incorporated organizations is that of a charitable company. Okay, so I guess maybe one of the things that I should probably just explain first of all, the differences between the incorporated and unincorporated organizations, so that as we go through this, maybe it'll start to mean more. So when we talk about an unincorporated organization, so I'm just going to touch back a slide quickly so we have a quick look at this. So when we talk about the unincorporated organization versus an incorporated organization, all of the organizations that we'll look at are certainly organizations, and they all have their standing and their place within the charitable space, or within the incorporated space. However, there is a distinct difference in terms of what we call, the best way to describe it is the identity of the organization. So I'm going to utilize something like, I'm going to say this: an unincorporated organization, whilst it will have its registration number, it is not deemed to have a personal identity. Whereas an incorporated organization has a personal identity. Okay. Now, this is what's going to help to decipher what I mean by that. An unincorporated organization that does not have a personal identity is unable to purchase or to lease or to rent things, whatever those things may be, whether it be renting a building or a space, getting into a long-term lease, buying property or whatever. It is unable to do those things in its own name. So if it's an unincorporated organization, it is unable to lease or buy or rent things in its own name. Whereas an incorporated organization can do all of those things. Okay. In other words, if I have a company, my company as an incorporated organization, which is the first one that we'll take a look at, is and does have a personal identity and can purchase. It can get into a long car lease, it can get into leasing a building, it can buy land and so on, and it can be done in the name of the organization. So that is the differentiator between an unincorporated organization and an incorporated organization. One has a personal identity, the incorporated, and one does not have a personal identity, i.e. the unincorporated. Now, what I've just mentioned there, and I just wanted to take some time to go into that, what I've mentioned there actually has a profound effect on the support and the safety for what would be the trustees or indeed the directors of an organization. Not having its own personal identity means that things that I want to engage in, so I want to lease a building, I want to purchase land, those things, if you're in an unincorporated organization, cannot be done by the organization itself, but are vested in the trustees of the organization. It means that those trustees actually carry a lot more responsibility than if they are in an incorporated organization, which provides them what's called often it eludes me, but it limits their liability. Okay, so and often when individuals take up trusteeship, they have neither read the governing document to explain to them how they must act and what they must do. They don't know the legal form, and they don't actually understand the ramifications of the organization that they are now taking on, because it can be a burden. So in the same way, if an organization, a company, directors who may act outside of the law and do things, the weight of the law can come down on them. In the case of being a trustee, whether you've acted inside the law or not, if unfortunately your charity decides that it can no longer operate and you have taken on the burden of, let's say, leasing a 20-year lease on a property, and you can now no longer, your members, maybe for even a period like this where members can't come out and engage in the activities, and you now no longer are getting all the funding that you used to get. Now it's going to be a lot harder for you to pay certain bills. Your landlords or your creditors can come after the trustees personally. And I'm sure there'll be some questions about that before we get to the end. So having done that, let's go forward and take a look at the different types of legal forms that there are. So you have what is the charitable company. In order to have a charitable company, you have to register the company, but and you then have to go and you have to register a charity. But you can't just register any company. It has to be a company limited by guarantee with no share capital. It's the only type of company that can have charitable registration on top of it. So then you'll have the benefits of a company and that of a charity. This is one of the original probably the longest standing type of charity that you could register as an incorporated organization from years back. And many organizations took this up because they wanted to put the protection in place, as in the limiting the liability of their trustees stroke directors. Okay, it means that provided you have worked within and the decisions that trustees make are within the confines of the law, then even if you get to a point where for whatever reason maybe you are losing the ability to continue paying your bills, or you've lost out on sponsorship and so on, at least your trustees and stroke directors will not have creditors coming after them personally. The debts of the organization die with the organization. So that's really important. And this is why, for me, it's really key that we make sure that we take the right type of legal form to protect the various trustees or directors that would be. But like I said, this was an older type of organization, and this type of organization requires filing your statutory requirements with Companies House. So you have to do your confirmation statement. Now it used to be called an annual return, but you do your confirmation statement and your annual accounts, and with the and you also have to file a set of reports with the Charities Commission as well. So again, annual accounts and your actual financials. So it was quite onerous in that there was 4 lots, a minimum of 4 lots of types of filing that had to be done. So that's something that requires some thinking about. Moving on from there, and hopefully this starts to answer one of the questions that came up earlier, is the CIC, which is the Community Interest Company, typically known as a social enterprise. And the idea of this type of organization is that any of the profits or the assets are purely for the public good. Now you think to yourself, oh, isn't that the same as that of a charity? Well, the answer is no. It's actually a lot closer to a company, but because the idea of the CIC is it's for the people, by the people. So typically the types of organizations that would probably set up a CIC would be like maybe a coffee shop where you're going in and you're having coffees in the morning. The idea is that you are giving jobs into the local community, and the proceeds, which is the income that's coming in, is also going back into the community to do local good. So you're probably providing services at real cut down prices so that the community at large can really benefit, especially in certain communities where maybe it's having that type of service really aids the community, people coming and sort of getting together. So the idea is that the CICs were set up with a certain amount of flexibility that allowed you to act like a company. So as long as everything that you did within the company was lawful within the company, you would still be able to, you'd still be able to potentially take profits from it. So you have 2 types of CIC. You have the CIC, which is set up like a company limited by guarantee. So you have it limited by guarantee with no share capital, or you have it limited by guarantee with share capital. Okay, now you need to think about this because, again, from a grant maker's point of view, typically they wouldn't necessarily want to give. You might find that you lose interest from some grant makers who think, well, if you are potentially taking profits from the CIC, then I don't necessarily want to give to that cause. So you might want to go with a CIC without share capital. Having said that, there are a lot of grant makers that understand the intrinsic value and the way in which the CICs are typically set up, that albeit that there may be an element of profit accumulation that may go to the directors, they understand the intrinsic good that that CIC is doing, because there is additional governance in respect of the directors as to the maximum amount of what percentage of the shares they can actually take value from in terms of their own personal profit. And there are rules that sort of govern a CIC in how it must act and what it must do. So you won't necessarily lose all grant potential, but you'll certainly maybe lose some if you go down the road of a CIC with shares. CIC with no share capital, then it's pretty similar to the company with no share capital who has charitable registration. But with the CIC, you then don't need to go and register as a charity register as I was correct. You don't need to register as a charity on top of the CIC. The CIC is its own little enclave, which is understood by anybody who wants to give in and sow their seeds into a non-for-profit organization, or that which is doing certainly charitable good. The next is what they call the CIO. Now, this is now no longer a company per se. It is 100% a charity, although it will show up on the Companies House register in the same way it will show up in the Charities Commission register. Now, the whole idea behind this was that the Charities Commission realized, and probably early 2010, but it came into law around 2012, they realized that there were organizations that wanted to limit the liability, as I was discussing earlier, of the trustees, but they didn't want to go down the onerous road of setting up a company, then setting up a charity, and having all of the filing that needs to be done with that. So what they done was they came out with the Charitable Incorporated Organization, which has all the benefits of the company limited by guarantee with no share capital, but without all the onerousness of the filings. So you just have a minimum of 2 pieces of filing, which is your accounts and your annual return. You also find with charity, typical charities, as opposed to setting up, as opposed to the company, that there's a little more lenience in terms of your filing. You tend not to receive fines if you are late. However, let me not suggest that you should do things late. You know, your record keeping and your financial control should be of impeccable order. Because again, when you start looking at fundraising, or when you start looking at wanting to get involved in long-term leasing and things like that, the first place that these organizations go back to is to the filing, Charities Commission, Companies House, just to see what your filing and what your financial controls are like. All right. So again, the CIO, great model. And there are 2 types of models as well. There is the foundation model and the association model. Okay, the foundation is what they call without wider membership. So this is where just the trustees make the decisions and in respect of the charity, or the association model, which is with wider membership, which means that your members also help to make those decisions, and the trustees then carry out the decisions that's made. Again, you need to think about your organization and what and how you want that organization to run. We come to now the first of the unincorporated organizations. So remember, in respect of unincorporated organizations, we're talking about charities that typically will not hold things in the name of the charity itself, but either will be part of the trustees vested in their name, or you can vest it in, if you have property or you have land, then it can be, the Charities Commission have a land holding service, which, you know, again, we can investigate at some point should we continue this conversation. But you tend to find, of the next two charities that I'm looking at, or the next two legal structures that I'm looking at, you tend to find lots of organizations that are now in the know are actually trying to move away from these, again, for better protection and for things like being able to future-proof and plan for the next generation that will take over. They're moving away from these types of charities because, like I said, they don't have their own personal identity. And as such, it means there's a lot more weight being carried. And I mean a lot more weight being carried by those who are the trustees. So charitable trust typically is a way of a group of people being able to manage such things as maybe money or whatever it is that has been endowed to them. And as a trust, they then manage that for the benefit of the individuals that they serve. Again, it's the legal form or the governing document that will be used, and I'm sure some of you may have come across it, things like trust deeds or deed of trust, and it's a specific type of governing document. Bear in mind, most of the governing documents are pretty much the same, but they underpin the different types of legal forms that we've been speaking about. Okay. And lastly, the unincorporated charitable association, which again is an unincorporated organization, same sort of challenges that I've referred to before. The problem with this particular charity is it's really just a very, very simple charity. It's just charity just to allow a group of volunteers to run a common purpose. You know, it was great back in the day because it just got people up and running and they could start doing their charitable things. But the reality is, you know, if I had a charity that was unincorporated, whether it be a charitable association or other like this, I would be looking to change it so I could better protect my trustees. Trustees in this have absolutely zero protection. And this type of organization really can't employ staff or have its own premises. Okay, again, no personal identity. And the governing document for this one is a straight up constitution. So just moving on. So we've taken a look at the various types of legal forms, and I'm just going to touch very quickly. And there's only a few more slides to go before we come to an end, and hopefully over a few minutes I'll take some more questions. But I want to just have a look a few differences between the community interest company, i.e. the CIC or social enterprise, and a typical charity. And here are just a few tidbits that I've put up here. So charities in their own right must be established only for charitable purposes as outlined in their governance and governing documents, whereas a CIC can be established for any lawful purpose as long as their activities are carried out for the benefit of the community. So again, with a CIC that's going to be charging for services, you know, it's typically the idea of a CIC is that you are empowering the community. So you may well be employing people from within the local community, selling a cake shop or a clothes store or whatever it is that you may be doing. So you're employing people, giving jobs in the local community, and maybe selling goods and services at affordable prices so that people within the local community can also come in and benefit. Whereas charities who have an established charitable purpose can only work within that purpose. And I think it's a really key point really for those charities, and I see it all the time, especially with faith-based charities where their objects have been set out, which outlines what they as a charity can do. And what you often find is some disaster happens somewhere in the world, and the charity actually think, oh my gosh, I really, really, really want to do something to help. And whilst that's great, the reality is if you look in your government governance, you are not, you know, it doesn't allow you to do that. That being the case, you know, you would therefore then be breaking your own laws in terms of the purposes that were set out. So you would have to go down the road of establishing new purposes, new objects to be able to, you know, to do something in respect of the new disaster that has just happened, and you really want to give aid to it. Be mindful of that. Also, as we've looked at already, and we looked at some detail, charities do have certain tax advantages. So, you know, we've spoken about the, you know, the advantages, the no corporation tax and 80 to 100% of rate relief, including VAT benefits. And I was asked more recently about, probably in the last few months, about VAT, which is very, very complicated, by the way, and whether or not as a charity you are able to not pay VAT on a property that you are leasing. So let's say your landlord is charging VAT on your rent or whatever. There are certain circumstances but that require you to first, well, first of all, there are circumstances where you can actually get 0 rated VAT on rent, but it's got to be a discussion, an agreement between you and your landlord, because your landlord may, he himself may be heavily VATted and wants to be able to recoup the VAT that on his own expenses. So it has to be between you and the landlord in the first instance. And depending on what percentage of that property you are, or that you are using for office purposes versus the carrying out of your objects, may determine a variant in that VAT bill. Okay. There's other things that you can get VAT relief on. So things such as some of your capital expenses. So if you were doing certain building projects that are going to benefit people coming into your environment. So for instance, maybe disabled toilets, hearing loops, for those churches. I mean, we was involved in a VAT, helping a church with VAT in the last year or so, that were putting in hearing loops for people who had impaired hearing and so on. And they was able to get some VAT relief on some of that. So again, it does require, each situation requires its own bit of research, and we're happy to talk to you about that. But CICs don't get any of that. You know, they are heavily regulated, and they'll be taxed just like any company as well. CICs also, legal form was provided for it has a framework that lends itself well to branding. So when I said earlier that CICs are, whilst they may not gain all of the support from all grant makers, the reality is that they're branded heavily as social enterprises who wish to adopt a limited company form so that they can act as a company and not be as rigid in carrying out their charitable purposes in the same way that a company would be. But the branding that has been given around the CIC or the social enterprise means that people typically know that a social enterprise is going to be a sort of, dare I say, non-for-profit type organization. Although bear in mind, I did say the CICs can have either a non-for-profit, no share element, or it can have share element, which are wrapped by rules. Okay. So coming down to the end here now, just want to touch on a few things about the roles of trustees. And I spoke at the beginning about when selecting trustees, you know, these have got to be people with real experience who come in and are able to provide some real tangible help to the charity. So the key things are, you know, they've got to ensure they're helping the charity to carry out its purposes and public benefit. You know, they've got to comply with the charity's governing law, and that is depicted by the very governing document that the charity underpins the legal form of that charity, which is why when trustees come on board, it's really important that they read the governing document and understand what they should do. They must always act in the charity's best interests and with reasonable care and skill. And I think that only comes from having the right people. and they've got to ensure that the charity is accountable, okay? And at all costs try to reduce the risk of liability, that liability which can often put charities or trustees in trouble. What makes a trustee eligible? Well, there is an age requirement. They've got to be at least 18 years old. And whilst I certainly love young people, I have a number of my own, I wouldn't necessarily want to put a whole bunch of 18-year-olds in charge of my charity. But you might, but especially if you're a charity who are working with sort of young people and so on, there is something about relatability that I think is really important. And so having a mixture of people on the trustee board is pretty key. Please be mindful about people who can't act as trustees and so therefore shouldn't put themselves forward. So for instance, people who have been maybe disqualified from being a director in a company, or people who have been disqualified from acting as a charity trustee, anyone who has an unspent conviction or involving dishonesty or deception. I mean, anything that's in that ballpark, you just need to be mindful of. Also, if there are individuals, and I appreciate there's tough times, certainly if they're not already here, then they're coming, but individuals who have IVAs may not be of their own making, but again, it's important that those people don't put themselves forward. Just to let you know that when you put your details forward to the Charities Commission to be a trustee, they go through something called the Right and Proper Persons Test. And that Right and Proper Persons Test just checks for all of those things that I was just talking about. So you just need to be mindful, and often that can slow up a registration. Another thing that just comes to mind is the fact that if you have overseas trustees, which you can have, bear in mind that that can also slow up the process as well, because those trustees have to be checked as well, again through the same process, the Right and Proper Persons check. Okay. Lastly, the governance that is required, and so this is just so that we have full information here. You have got to have trustee meetings. The role of a trustee is to ensure the health and the financial health and strength of the charity, and to make sure that the objects as laid out in your governing document are being run in respect of the activities that you are doing. The trustees may not appear at the charity on a daily basis. They may come together 3, 4, 5 times a year. They'll certainly be at AGM meetings unless they have to apologize. But it's important because they are the ones who are responsible for the running of the charity. They have to ensure good record keeping, and I talk about the types of financial controls, receipts, and policies in place for, like I said, conflicts of interest. And if you're looking after vulnerable adults and young children, then you need to have safeguarding in place. That's the role of the trustees, to make sure that those things are being done and are in place. Annually, an AGM where you sit down and you talk about, hey, this is what we spent throughout the year, here are the accounts, and this is what we aim to do next year. AGMs are a fantastic way for you to be able to really make those who are supporting you understand what you have spent money on, and to gain their support again for the following year. Many governing documents now outline the fact that trustees will only be will be in as a trustee for a period of time, typically 3 to 5 years. There are things that we can, when we're doing governing documents, that we can write around that to sort of change that. But typically, you need to make sure you have a good election of trustees, how you're going to go about doing that. And these are things that you can determine yourselves, but you determine these at the outset of the of sort of setting up the charity. Okay. And don't forget that, and I see this happen all too often, everyone's so involved in running the charity and sort of making things happen that they forget to actually do their statutory filing. Okay, don't wait till last minute. You remember, you have 12 months of operation, and as a charity you have 10 months in order to then get your accounts in order and get them filed. If you're a company at the same time, so you're a charitable company, You then have 9 months to report on the company and 10 months on the charity side of things. Okay, right. So we've come to the end of this session. Kat?
Yep, that was great, Des. And we have a couple of final questions, some nice ones to end with, actually. So the first one is from Gode Okerson, and he asks, how can a company limited by guarantee convert a charitable incorporated organization, convert to a charitable incorporated organization?
Okay, so yeah, there is no conversion per se. There is no way of saying, right, we have this company we're going to convert to. What happens is you have to set up a new charity. That's how it's done. That's the conversion process. So we would go down the road of setting up a new CIO. That CIO, now what we would do is we would certainly communicate if that was a charitable company, i.e., so it's a limited by guarantee company with charitable with a charitable registration, then we would look at first the charity registration. The likelihood is that it would probably be an unincorporated charity that it was registered as anyway. And we would then liaise with the Charities Commission to let them know that we are going to be utilizing the same name, because the likelihood is you want to be able to utilize the same name. If that organization is already claiming things like gift aid and things like that, then the likelihood is they want to be able to maintain the tax reference number for gift aid and so on. So those would be things that we'd look into, speak to the relevant parties in the chain, and just make sure that there was a smoother process as possible whilst we would create the new organization and then port some of those other services over.
Great. And I always love ending on this one. Do you provide charity registration services?
Absolutely, yes. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. And we have a whole process that we go through, everything from the initial consultation, where we sit down, and for us, it's really key. It might appear to be a bit onerous at times, because sometimes, one person thinks, yes, I have all the answers. I know exactly where I want to go and what I want to do. But what we try to do is we try to engage all of those that would be taking that journey with that person who has the first vision. And the idea is that they all get the information at the same time. So a lot of what we've spoken about here today, we go into more detail, and thus they can then walk away from that meeting sort of saying, right, okay, great, we've had this detail, we know exactly what we want to do. Yes, we'd like to give to set this up for us. And then the process really starts in earnest. And again, we keep the process really simple. We do the lion's share of the legwork, really just pulling the information from the client as is necessary, and we do this in a timetabled way, working with we have a team which is called our service delivery managers, who basically manage the whole process between any of our services and the specialist on the other side. So I have a team of charity advisors, and my head charity advisor, head charity consultant is absolutely really, really great. And she just has a great bedside manner and goes through a number of questions that allow us to be able to draft the governing documents, draft the application that must go into the Charities Commission, whilst pulling information relating to the activities that each of the charities do, mapping those activities to the objects, and those objects then appear in those governing documents. So there is a real timetabled process that we use, that we've been using for years, and works seamlessly.
Fab. Okay. Excellent. Well, that was fantastic, Des. So much content there, and I'm sure everyone has found that valuable. So do you have anything else before we sign off, Des?
Yeah, I mean, I've touched on sort of funding throughout this, and I just really want to say that, in this time here where, we're realizing that some of the organizations where they were getting support from their members are not necessarily getting the support that they should get, you know, we've got a great fundraising department who are, and like I said, you know, looking into doing research and trying to work out, well, what can be mapped to the activities and objects of various charities. And where those organizations, because we see this a lot, where organizations come in, they look at, we take a look at them, and we assess you properly, and we think, right, you know what, this organization isn't yet fit for funding in the way that they might want to have funding. So to that end, we then, that the road doesn't stop there. We put them through what's called the Good to Give roadmap. And in our roadmap, we then look at that charity and look at what needs to be put in place to get them fit for funding. And as such, through a number of the services, whether it be some of our financial controls, or it be maybe, you know, some charity compliance, you'd be surprised, you know, we have people who have, or organizations that have come along that say they do a particular activity, but when you map that activity back to their objects and the activities are so different, which means when I talk about public benefit and the two aspects of that, you know, they might be meeting a certain group of people, but the actual activity itself doesn't really marry up with the objects. And so we have to put those things there right. And we're very, very good at being able to decipher and discern exactly where the challenges are, and really put clients on the right road. So we have the Good to Give, we have not just the fundraising side of things, but we have the Good to Give roadmap, which then gives us a holistic view of that client, or any client, and what may need to be put right in order to put them on the right road. So yeah, I certainly ask people to take the challenge. They can go to our website at Good to Give, www.goodtogive.co.uk. I'm sure Kat, you'll send out an email to everybody.
Absolutely.
Anyway.
Yes.
And we've got a quiz up there which they can just, you know, take the roadmap quiz, and then it kind of gives them an idea of where they are, yeah, and then we start from there, really, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Well, we hope you all have a fantastic Christmas with your families, and do look out for lots more activity from us in the new year. Stay close. Absolutely, please do complete the quiz. We've got so much to support you with in the new year. We really can support you as partners, not just a company, but we really are your partners, and we're here to help. So have a fantastic rest of the week. Have a great Christmas, and we hope to speak to you soon. Bye-bye.
Absolutely. Stay safe, everybody, and look after yourselves.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.